US President Donald Trump issues a fresh tariff threat after his penalties, they were ruled illegal, forcing nations to postpone trade talks, including India. It comes as New Delhi and Moscow hold a top bilateral meeting on deepening economic ties today. We discuss whether oil purchases are back on the table. The UK and France, they are planning to arm Ukraine with a nuclear weapon or a dirty bomb. That's according to Russia's Foreign Intelligence Service, revealing it aims to give Kyiv leverage in peace talks with Russia. A web of crime in the underworld of a disgraced financier to tremors rippling through the British elite. Police arrest former ambassador to the US, Peter Mandelson, mere days after former Prince Andrew is released on bail. RT speaks to an Epstein survivor who's demanding acknowledgement and justice.
No one is above the law. And more than anything else, we are going to bring this to an end, this human trafficking epidemic.
And Afghanistan mourns those lost in strikes carried out by Pakistan over the weekend, gathering at a mass grave during the holy month of Ramadan. We hear exclusively from a government spokesman in Kabul who warns Afghanistan will respond in its own time. Hello and welcome. You're watching RT India. I'm Osama Shab, live from New Delhi. We have a packed bulletin ahead with major world developments, including our top story. A privileged meeting of partners is taking shape as India and Russia's top bilateral platform for building economic ties. It is meeting in Moscow this Tuesday. And there's plenty to touch base on for the two nations, especially after Donald Trump's reign of tariff terror. It was shot down by the US Supreme Court. But the US president, he has issued a warning.
Any country that wants to play games with the ridiculous Supreme Court decision, especially those that have ripped off the USA for years, and even decades, will be met with a much higher tariff, and worse, than that which they just recently agreed to. Buyer beware.
Trump's speech is not directed to any specific country as of yet, but we need to understand the overall context that is here. Trump's tariffs are targeted to Russian oil buyers, but the closest allies are very divided over it. For example, Hungary has now blocked the move by the EU to sanction Moscow and to stop the flow of Russian oil supplies. And they're also saying that EU loan to Ukraine will also remain blocked until the Russian oil imports and the shipments resume. So this is one kind of reaction that is coming in. And also the oil shipments to Hungary and Slovakia have been interrupted since 27th Jan. That's also something that we need to note here. Let's take a look at what Hungarian Foreign Minister has to say about this.
It is a sovereign right of ours to decide where we are buying the energy sources from and what kind of energy sources we buy. This is our national sovereign right. And we are not ready to buy more expensive energy sources than the current ones, and we are not ready to buy from less reliable sources than the current one. This is our sovereignty issue.
Now, India, which was amongst the biggest purchaser of Russian oil, has also been maintaining that they are going to keep their national interest as their priority. And they also maintain that all of the oil purchases that they are making depends directly on the demand that the country has, the energy demands that the country has. So the question here is, does the US Supreme Court verdict change anything, or will it allow Delhi to bargain on this particular aspect with the US? That is something something that we need to see what will happen next. And here we also need to know that India and the US trade talks has also been kept on hold right now. An Indian delegation was supposed to visit Washington to have the trade talks move ahead, but right now that is entirely on hold. India-US joint statement, which came in on 6th Feb, that is very recently, it actually said that Delhi has agreed to reduce the dependence on Russian oil. However, the Supreme Court ruling also adds a new twist to this entire issue.
Yeah.
And the question here is, what happens now when Russia's Indian oil purchases, is it going to reduce or increase or stay the same? Because Indian refiners might just stick with this purchase because it's more cheaper and it's competitive. Now, there's also a report by a Finnish think tank, which is the Center for Research on Energy and Clean Air, which has stated that while Russian oil imports have dropped overall last year, although the volume did not go down. Now, that is something important to note here. The volume of Russian crude oil has remained actually 6% above from the entirety of the export that has happened 4 years ago, and that is as per this Finnish think tank report. And that is also because Russia has continued to provide oil at much more competitive prices and cheaper prices to India and other countries. So now that in the US Senate, there are also 22 Democrats who have introduced a bill to force refunds on these Trump's illegal tariffs.
Yeah.
So with all this development that is happening around this, the US pressure on oil purchases from Russia is slightly on a slippery ground right now. So we'll have to see how this goes ahead.
And earlier, we spoke to an international affairs expert who called Donald Trump out for going beyond the law to roll out tariffs. Listen in.
It leaves him, I think, looking pretty stupid because he is countering his own institutions. His own institutions, after all, the Supreme Court upholds US law. And they said you have used emergency powers to put these tariffs. You have not gone to the Congress, which is what you should have done. So it's a slap in the face of that president. But he is very stubborn. He has a short memory, and he's a populist. So he says 100 things a day in his Truth Social, and you have to pick out one relevant, or you have to see what Scott Bessent and the other people are saying behind them. And they're all interested in increasing tariffs because they want to show US manufacturing gains, which are not going to be there. It is the US citizen who is going to face the brunt by paying higher prices. So everything India was exporting, textiles and pharma and auto parts, will go up by 18%. Yeah, I mean, India will also get cheaper US products, but Indians may not want to use that. They may not want US dairy because they are quite satisfied with their own dairy, with their own wheat, with their own soya. Yeah. So this is all also in the air and speculative, which is something Trump indulges in. He likes to gamble. He likes to, that is his, his art of negotiation, the art of the deal, as he calls it, and his book is on that, in which he always, I mean, if he's going to, he's after all a property agent, if he wants to sell a house, he'll first say $500 million and then come down to 200, but the other side has to be strong, and I hope the Indian side remains strong like they have been earlier, but in the past 1 month, they have bent also.
But a conversation you should not miss. Why is the global conscience a Western thing? Why is there a perpetual bias when it comes to India in the media? And what makes a Putin-Modi meeting so special? RT India's brand new show with former External Affairs Minister Salman Khurshid. It debuts right here on RT India.
We had this very important visit of President Putin to India, which consolidates a long historical relationship with Russia. Was there a special feel about this particular summit? How do you see it?
A summit-level engagement between leaders of India and Russia can never be called a routine thing because these are two very important powers, and the relationship is also a very deep relationship. Our two leaders, whether they meet in India or in Moscow or they meet in China or somewhere on the sidelines of something, it is always a very important meeting.
Question question that often arises is about how the global media treats us. How would you react to this?
Oh, sadly, the story with the Western media is that they have always been very biased against India. This has been the case not just in the recent past. This has been the case for many decades now. There is some sense of superiority in the Western media. They assume that role of global media, global conscience keepers, global opinion makers. Although the reality today is many other forces in the media are rising. They are also rising as important media voices. For example, RT is an important voice. Somehow there is constant effort to run down India, show India in bad light. They should first of all stop giving certificates of quality or certificates of performance to other countries. India is too big a country, a successful democracy. They question our democracy also.
And on to revelations from Russian intelligence. A new report says that Paris and London, they are preparing to arm Ukraine with a nuclear bomb to provide Kyiv leverage in negotiations with Russia. Moscow has vowed to raise its findings during the next round of peace talks.
The United Kingdom and France realize that the development of the situation in Ukraine leaves no chance of achieving their coveted victory over Russia by the hands of the armed forces of Ukraine. It is believed that Ukraine needs to be supplied with a wonder weapon. Kiev could lay claim to more favorable terms for ending hostilities if it possessed an atomic bomb, or at least a so-called dirty bomb. London and Paris are actively working on resolving the issues of providing Kiev with such weapons and the means of their delivery.
First and foremost, of course, according to the release statement by the Russian Foreign Intelligence Service, France and the United Kingdom no longer believe that Ukraine could defeat Russia on the battlefield, stating that some sort of wonder weapon should be provided to Ukraine to, of course, give Ukraine more favorable terms in terms of negotiations to end the conflict. And, of course, this is due to the fact that neither French nor British authorities and elites no longer believe that Russia could be defeated by Ukraine's armed forces. And Germany has refused to participate in all of that, stating that this is a dangerous venture. And the Russian Foreign Intelligence Service states that London and Paris are actively working on providing Ukraine with such weapons. They're also working on the delivery methods, on how some components, equipment, or tech could be provided to Ukraine. And this is generally all to make it look like Ukraine's nuclear weapon, the potential nuclear weapon, was domestically produced. And this statement also asserts that the United Kingdom and France, they all understand that this would violate the international law, as well as this is going to violate the Non-Proliferation Treaty. The Russian Foreign Intelligence Service also concludes that these alleged plans just show a loss of realism by London and Paris, and that they will not be able to avoid responsibility. And of course, the Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov has also responded to the recently released statement. Let's listen in.
Information from the Foreign Intelligence Service about the planned delivery of nuclear weapons to Ukraine by Great Britain and France will be taken into account during the negotiations.
There are also reportedly some voices of reason coming from the UK's and France's political, military and diplomatic circles, who understands the real dangers such actions could bring. And of course, overall, this is not the first time that we've heard such warmongering rhetoric generally, and the rhetoric and the desire, Europe's desire to provide Ukraine with a nuclear weapon. And another point which is important to add is that the New START treaty between Moscow and Washington just recently ended at the beginning of February this year. And this was the last, basically meaning that there's no longer any agreement holding back the nuclear arms race.
And Dmitry Medvedev has called it beyond concerning that London and Paris, they want to supply a warring nation with nukes, and stressed that Russia would have the right to take symmetrical action.
This is a direct transfer of nuclear weapons to a warring country. Russia will have to use any including non-strategic nuclear weapons, against targets in Ukraine that pose a threat to our country, and if necessary, against the supplier countries, which become accomplices in a nuclear conflict. This is the symmetrical response to which Russia has the right.
And for some insight now, we can go live to defense expert, retired Major General Sanjay Meston. Major General Sanjay Meston, thank you very much for speaking with RT India. First of all, these fresh revelations, how do you think these revelations will impact the peace talks going forward?
Yeah, Sama, definitely they are going to affect the peace talks. The Russian intelligence services have got some, I'm quite sure, reliable inputs, and that is why this news is being made public. Now, if this is true, apparently this will be expressed and discussed in the peace talks, and I think the peace talks are now going to go in a back burner. Now, what is the intent of the United Kingdom and France to arm or so-called, send components to prepare a nuclear bomb or a dirty bomb there?
Yeah,
I think, I feel it is the most inappropriate step at this juncture. Firstly, would the people of Ukraine desire a nuclear weapon on their territory? The answer is clearly no. And why? Because if this nuclear weapon was at the beginning of the war or before the war, then things would have had a different connotation. But now, from the military perspective, the Russians hold about 20% of the territory, which includes almost the entire of Donbass, which was one of their stated military objectives. Now, if that be so, we are having peace talks to decide what is, finally come into such an agreement that probably Donbass may be part of Russia, maybe. The way peace talks are going on, Crimea may be recognized again to be part of Russia. And as regard Kherson and Zaporizhzhia is concerned, for that some talks or, some give and take apparently will be there. Now, if this is a situation on ground, to give a nuclear bomb or a dirty bomb through clandestine means or where it can be assembled and to be depicted that this has been locally produced or, assembled by the Ukrainians in Ukraine, that is going to be very, very devastating. And God forbid, tomorrow, if this dirty bomb is used to any extent by the Ukrainian, I think the response from the Russia will be colossal. Then there is no force, no bar to use the nuclear weapons. And not only that.
In fact, Major General Sanjay Meston, I also want to understand from you, what would Ukraine actually benefit from making one dirty bomb or having one nuclear weapon against a nation that has a lot of nuclear weapons in its arsenal?
Yeah, very true. Exactly. Ukraine, that's why I was making that remark, the people of Ukraine would not like to have it. Because 1 or 2 or 3 dirty bombs is immaterial for the Ukrainians to even get it and to use it. If they use it, then there is no stopping for the Russians to go on a full throttle to, bomb entire Ukraine, I would say, to that extent, because then it amounts to a nuclear war. And not only that, it will give leeway to Russia to even bomb the United Kingdom and France.
Yeah.
So I think this is a very retrograde step being considered if it is true. Apparently, it appears that it has got some substance.
Yeah.
The fact that it will be tabled also during the peace talks, so nothing is going to be achieved. And the fact of the matter is, the Ukrainians have also, stood out for at least 4 years. They have been able to resist. Of course, for 20% of the territory has been lost. But throughout, no nuclear weapons has been used by Russia, despite, the bombers of the Russians being struck. And today also there has been an oil refinery attack in Tartaristan. So despite that, the Russians have not used a nuclear weapon.
Yeah.
But now if the Ukrainians do it in any way, a dirty bomb also, then I think that the entire, then it will result, I would say, in a World War III scenario.
Yeah.
So
in fact,
perhaps.
In fact, sir, I also want to talk about this hypocrisy from the NATO countries, because on one hand, They are denying a country like Iran from building a nuclear program. But on the other hand, they are willing to facilitate Ukraine. And in the past, there have been reports that a lot of these weapons, a lot of these American-made weapons, they have ended up in black market. The question is, what happens if the same happens with a nuclear weapon?
Yeah, very true. See, on one hand, again, I remember when I was in Afghanistan, this was one of the biggest fears, that a dirty bomb can be used by the terrorists, which can be supplied by Iran or the Pakistanis. Now, why have double standards? On one hand, we don't want to allow Iran to even enrich their uranium. And on the second hand, we want to tell other nations, that you can't, you can be equipped like now planning to give a dirty bomb or a nuclear bomb components to Ukraine. So I think the double standards have to be set aside, and this is what is going to affect the entire world peace. I don't see any reason, and this double standards by the West are apparent, and they need to be, curbed by the rest of the world.
Yeah.
In fact, countries like Brazil, India, the leaders of the global South, we have to have one international law and policy. We cannot have different yardsticks for different people, because a common man will also today ask why Iran is not being allowed when, on the other hand, the neighboring state Pakistan has been allowed. In fact, their nuclear bombs, I would say, are more dangerous. They were the ones who were claiming that this is an Islamic bomb. So this double standards and hypocrisy by the West needs to stop. They have to treat everyone equally. Otherwise, it will be free for all world. Anyone can do anything. Yeah. And that is not in the long run going to be in the interest of the West and even the United States of America.
Yeah. Before we talk about the threat of nuclear proliferation, I also want to understand this. It seems that the United Kingdom, countries like France, they're pushing a conflict that they themselves have elongated. They're now taking it to another level. What does Europe gain by facilitating Ukraine in this very manner, sir?
Yeah, exactly. It's again a very relevant question. What does Europe gain? See, President Trump, all said and done, he made a large number of attempts, including the last talks in Alaska, to go for peace talks, and he himself met President Putin. So his intent was to at least bring peace, because what is happening in the end? Lives of both sides are being lost. Who's dying? On battlefield, it is the Russian and the Ukrainian soldiers. Yeah. Their economies are being hit. Does it affect so-called Europe directly or indirectly? I would say no. In fact, now the reshaping of European defense system is taking place. They are enhancing their budgets to 5 to 6% of the GDP from the erstwhile just for 1.5 to 2. Yeah. So there is a defense build-up. But I think they are playing the proxies by using Ukraine. Who's going to suffer in the end? If
the Ukrainians, absolutely.
Yep. Ukrainians are going to suffer. Yeah. So their interest is only this war continues so that the weaponries are supplied. After all, let's be very clear, it is also an industry. So, sending weapons to other countries and arms, ammunition, artillery, ammunition. This is an industry and everyone is gaining from it.
Yeah. So Sir, a final word from you. Very quickly, what is the threat of nuclear proliferation, considering that other European nations like Poland, they have also spoken about developing their own nukes, sir?
Very valid question. The threat, it can happen that today countries which are non-nuclear may like to go for nuclear, because somehow it gives us some kind of a security guarantee that if you have nuclear weapons, perhaps a conflict may not arise. But at the end, it is going to be harmful to the entire world if every nation, small or big, starts having large number of nuclear weapons. Then one person starts it. I think that the mutual assured destruction of the entire world is there. So overall, I think the lead nations, whether it is United States, whether it is Russia, whether it is other nations, they have to take a lead role in fact, bringing down the number of nuclear weapons, because it is well known that this is going to destabilize the world, and not only destabilize, it is going to destroy the entire universe.
Absolutely. And more importantly, could such a move trigger a direct confrontation between Russia and the NATO countries? Who knows? Major General Sanjay Meston, thank you very much for speaking with RT India, and thank you very much for sharing your thoughts, sir.
Thank you.
The Epstein files fallout has dragged former royals and seasoned politicians into the fire. Britain's former US envoy, Peter Mandelson, he has been arrested and released on bail, pending further investigation into suspected misconduct in public office. In fact, reports suggest Mandelson was questioned on passing sensitive and potentially market-moving information to Jeffrey Epstein in 2009 when he was a senior minister in the British government. This is set to include an internal report discussing ways the United Kingdom it could raise money, especially after the 2008 global financial crisis, including by selling off government assets. Now, Mandelson's questioning, it comes just 4 days after ex-Prince Andrew's arrest, with the former royal also suspected of misconduct in public office. In fact, we spoke to Epstein's survivor, Rena O, who told us about her encounters with the late sex offender's key associate, Ghislaine Maxwell.
She showed me a different side of her, and I had not really known anything more about Ghislaine other than I met her one time at the townhouse. I didn't know who she was. I just knew her name. Actually met her 2 times before, but I never spent time with her. I realized that she was a very dark, person when she showed me this closet full of like weird toys that she was obviously using on the girls down in that property, because she told me that was her closet. And she had me meet her upstairs in the bedroom because she had something to show me. And Jeffrey took me up there and she just looked at me with a smile like she wanted to hurt me. That's one of the things I saw in Florida. The way he was behaving was very different. Like he was more like controlling, and I don't know, there's like this big like power dynamic play that took place. And if I, like, for instance, when we were traveling back on the private jet, I like sat in the front seat of the private jet and he gave me the dirtiest look. Like, how dare you sit in the front seat? And I had never seen that side of Jeffrey Epstein before. And so it just didn't feel right, the whole thing. And spending an entire week with them, I didn't like their energy and their vibe. Like, it was wrong. Like, I didn't want to be around them. Like, it just felt, I was very uncomfortable.
Rena, were you also being introduced to his clients?
I was being shown around to like some of these strange men. I don't know why they were taking me out and showing me to like older men, and I didn't understand. He displayed a photograph of me on his desk. I'm sure it's somewhere. I don't know if they're in those files, but he definitely had it framed, and I wasn't the only one. There was an entire lineup of photographs of girls, and everyone knew that was me when I walked into the house. I don't like that either.
Rena, when you first encountered Jeffrey Epstein, did you fully understand the situation that you were stepping into?
No, not at all. I thought I was just meeting another wealthy art collector in New York City, and I had been to a lot of other townhouses in the neighborhood, not on 71st Street, but, like maybe 65th Street, 67th Street. No, I was not expecting that at all. And, now looking back, I don't know, like, I wish I'd never met him. I wish that I'd never gone over to his house. I think this definitely changed my life, just what he did. And I would have never imagined back then that he would have been engaged in all of this today. And with the files coming out, it's just so much bigger than I ever imagined. At the time, back in the early 2000s, almost everyone that I knew that was part of the New York social scene had somehow been to Jeffrey Epstein's house. This is how much of a reach he had. There are people that I met outside of his house that, and then we would talk And for some reason, his name came up. And this happened more than once. So there are a lot of people that ended up in that townhouse.
Reno, thank you very much for sharing your story here at RT India. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me the time to tell my story.
To Afghanistan, where locals in border areas, they have gathered at a mass grave to bury those killed in strikes by Pakistan over the weekend. Islamabad says it targeted militants, but in an interview with RT India, a spokesperson for Afghanistan called the airstrikes an unforgivable crime against civilians and also warned that Kabul would respond to the targeting of civilians during Ramadan.
Violating Afghanistan's airspace and carrying out unjust and brutal bombardment of our civilians is an unforgivable crime. The fact that it was carried out during the holy month of Ramadan makes this crime even more heinous. They deliberately targeted innocent Afghan civilians, including women and children who were asleep, as well as elderly people. This was an unlawful and barbaric act, and any attempt to justify this action is utterly unacceptable. Their claim that terrorists or TTP were targeted is a blatant falsehood. Only the homes of ordinary people, a madrasa and a mosque were struck, in which a number of civilians were martyred. They are trying to divert attention from their own security failures. By carrying out such attacks, they seek to mislead their people and make desperate, unsuccessful attempts to hide their own security failures and the deepening crises they face in various sectors. Such attacks will not go unanswered. The Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan will respond to these attacks at an appropriate time.
Well, those are the latest developments this hour on RT India. Stay with us. We'll be back shortly.